"Oh, you're still here? Don't overstay your welcome. Ordinary people should live in places that suit them. Now, I will pay $1,000 for the mortgage, so please leave." I thought, despite having to pay $2,700 every month. I was stunned by the sudden loud voice of my sister-in-law and by how off-target her remarks were. She defended her stance, saying, "I won't let you guys use our house any longer. From now on, my husband and I will live here." Then she ordered me to leave the house. It seemed that similar things had been said to my husband, and my sister-in-law was desperate to drive us out. My husband, Keith, always calm, replied, "If my sister says so, we should leave." I decided to accompany him and leave the house. An unexpected future awaited my sister-in-law and her husband after they drove us out. A month after we left, they learned of the reality that awaited them. "My name is Vanessa. My husband and I are a working couple." The incident where my sister-in-law came to our house and tried to drive us out began when we started living with my in-laws. At that time, my sister-in-law Rachel was accompanying her husband on his overseas assignment and was not in the US, leaving her parents alone. During this period, my in-laws began to wish to live with us in their house, living together. As I was surprised, my mother-in-law said, "We are getting older, and living alone brings anxieties. Being with you both will give us peace of mind." Suddenly invited to my husband's family home, we were presented with the proposal to live together. This was unexpected not only for me but also for my husband, Keith. We initially met through a matchmaking app. Meeting through such apps is common, but often interactions end after the first meeting or communication fades away. However, Keith continued to communicate through emails and we had several meals together. I liked Keith and felt that he had similar feelings for me. After 2 years of dating, we got married. Our parents were very pleased with our marriage, given our close ages. However, there was one person whose reaction was unclear. That was Keith's sister, Rachel. She was 3 years older than Keith and had been married for a year when we announced our engagement. Rachel boasted about marrying before Keith, saying, "I'm surprised Keith is getting married. Compared to an elite like me, Keith is ordinary, but it's good he found someone. Though she is far inferior to me, at least he's marrying a common woman." I was shocked by her words. Moreover, Rachel continued, "My husband is set for an overseas assignment, being a successful man. I'm fluent in Spanish, so I'll accompany him. I suppose Keith and his wife can't even imagine our wonderful life." I didn't feel angry at that moment, probably because her behavior seemed so childish. It wasn't because I was particularly tolerant, but because Rachel, who looked down on us, seemed insignificant to me. Keith was probably used to Rachel's behavior and showed his usual smile. Since Keith wasn't perturbed, I decided not to respond to Rachel's comments. She was used to being ignored by her brother, so my lack of response was probably frustrating for her. "Was it Vanessa? Are you sure about choosing Keith? I might be older, but even as a woman, I think I'm superior to him," she asked me. I responded, "Keith is very important to me." I answered out of love for Keith, but Rachel seemed unsatisfied, saying, "But true happiness for a woman comes from marrying a high-status man and living a wealthy life. High status itself brings wonderful feelings. Indeed, some people value being financially supported by a high-income spouse. However, I don't share that value," and shook my head, saying, "I don't agree with that view." With this reply, Rachel seemed to consider me as someone different, a loser who couldn't share her values. "Well, marrying Keith means you're also an ordinary person. Both of you will lead a boring, uneventful life. There are many people who follow such a fate, so don't be pessimistic and do your best," she concluded. I was just shocked by the harsh words directed at us, as we looked forward to our wedding and wished for happiness. Keith always responded calmly to Rachel's words. Witnessing this, I felt my heart wasn't as disturbed by Rachel's words as I had thought, and I regained my composure. Sometime after our wedding, Rachel and her husband moved abroad. As a result, my in-laws, feeling lonely without Rachel and her husband around, proposed that we live with them. Since there was no clear reason to refuse, we accepted the temporary living arrangement until Rachel and her husband returned. Over time, to our surprise, Rachel's husband's overseas tenure extended far beyond the initial plan. And though it felt like a blink of an eye, 10 years had already passed since we started living under one roof. During this time, I was blessed to welcome a healthy baby boy into our new family. However, one concern arose during our extended cohabitation: the aging of our long-inhabited home. Every time our energetic son ran around the house, we worried whether the old pillars and walls could withstand the impact. Without any concrete solutions or suggestions from my in-laws, time just passed by. Perhaps they were also unable to directly address the aging house due to financial constraints or other reasons. Even so, we looked towards a solution: demolishing the old house and building a new one on the same land. Building a new house not only freed us from concerns about aging, but also reduced the risk of damage, no matter how vigorously our son played. When we decided on this, my in-laws were very pleased with the plan. They expressed their feelings and deep desire to continue living with us. Fortunately, after making this decision, we faced no major issues and began preparing for our new stage in life. As we are not wealthy, paying for the new house in one go was impossible, and we resorted to a mortgage, continuing to pay $2,700 monthly. Initially, we hoped my in-laws would contribute to the mortgage. So we proposed, "Father, Mother, we'd like to discuss the house mortgage. What do you think about contributing $1,000 monthly?" They were visibly surprised, questioning, "Why should we pay for it? Isn't the house built by you both? We are just guests and shouldn't bear the cost," refusing to contribute to the mortgage. We had expected them to contribute $1,000 considering their regular incomes, or at least $500 if $1,000 was too much. Contrary to our expectations, they maintained that the house construction was our independent decision and refused any financial involvement. Clearly, arguing wouldn't solve anything, so we decided to manage the mortgage repayments ourselves. Then, one day, Rachel, though living abroad, somehow heard about us living with my in-laws in the new house and questioned, "Vanessa, I heard that you've been living with my parents while we're abroad. Is that true?" Despite explaining, "Yes, it's true. Your sudden absence made your parents feel lonely, and we decided to live together," Rachel abruptly denied my words. Confused, I asked, "Why do you think I'm lying?" She claimed, "Because you and Keith are just ordinary people. There's no way you'd live with my parents. They rely on our elite family." Rachel, who quit her job to become a homemaker abroad, considers herself elite, a concept I find hard to grasp. She taunted, "See, you can't argue because I'm right," leaving me with a wry smile. Despite all her misplaced assertions, I was unsure how to react to her confident demeanor. "By the way, we're planning to return to the US next month." "Oh, you're coming back? I'll let your parents know." Since starting their overseas life, Rachel and her husband rarely visited their home, and they hardly came by even when in the US. My in-laws would surely be happy to hear of Rachel's return. "No, it's not just a visit. We'll be living in that house from now on." "What do you mean?" "That means you're no longer needed there." I couldn't hide my surprise at that statement. Rachel living in the family home means her husband's overseas assignment has ended. Initially, we planned to move out at this point, but the issue was the mortgage. It seems that Rachel and her husband would then take over the monthly mortgage payment of $2,700. Her husband, interested with a job overseas, and Rachel, who considers herself elite, should have no trouble with the mortgage payments. Thinking this, I remained silent. Rachel informed me of her return and then maintained her stance. I briefly replied, understood, and ended the call. Considering our future plans, I quickly relayed Rachel's message to Keith. Our son was at school when we talked about this. At that time, my in-laws, sensing that their daughter was coming back, appeared in the living room with beaming smiles. They were delighted, saying, "Finally, Rachel and her family are coming back. This marks the end of our unstable days." Throughout this period, we bore the burden of mortgage repayments. But my in-laws supported daily expenses like electricity and food. We strongly felt the need to avoid a lopsided financial burden in our living arrangement. However, my in-laws were constantly worried, often expressing concerns that making us bear the living costs means your financial situation must be unstable. Indeed, before we started living together, Rachel and her husband, who lived with my in-laws, never let them bear any costs, and they compared us based on that fact. While our stance wasn't fundamentally problematic, Rachel's family's return deemed our presence unnecessary. From the beginning, Keith and I saw Rachel and her husband's return as the end of our temporary shared living. Hence, we started preparing for our departure. Now, the responsibility for the mortgage payment will shift to Rachel and her husband, significantly reducing our burden. However, their sudden announcement to return made finding a suitable property challenging. Eventually, Rachel and her husband arrived. Wow, this old house has transformed so much. What a surprise. Rachel expressed her astonishment and then turned to me. Oh, you're still here? Don't overstay your welcome. Ordinary people should live in places that suit them. Now, I will pay $1,000 for the mortgage, so please leave. Despite having to pay $2,700 every month. I thought this but realized the $1,000 was something Rachel heard from my in-laws. We had discussed a monthly contribution of $1,000 when we asked for their assistance with the payments. We planned to cover living expenses if they took on that payment, but ultimately, my in-laws decided against bearing the $1,000, leading us to request they cover living costs. Keith and I, even as a family, disliked the idea of one-sided burdens. At that time, it was clear to me that Rachel had misunderstood. She defended her stance, saying, "I won't let you and your husband use our house any longer. From now on, my husband and I will live here." Then she ordered me to leave the house. When Keith returned from work that day, Rachel said similar things to him, desperately trying to kick us out. Keith, always calm, replied, "If my sister says so, we should leave." I agreed with him. We were already planning to leave, not rushed by Rachel. But there were things to settle before departing. There's still a remaining mortgage debt, so we'll leave it to you and your husband. Keith said that as he presented the mortgage documents. Sure, the monthly payment is easy for us. Rachel and her husband easily agreed to take on the mortgage repayment responsibility. Seeing this, we decided to leave the house and felt relieved. We always thought a shorter term of shared living was preferable, especially considering our growing son. We also wanted to avoid living with somewhat impolite in-laws. On moving day, Rachel commented, "So you're finally leaving. I heard from our parents. You've been letting them bear the living costs, haven't you? How does a couple with a child manage in such a situation? Have you been raising a child without money?" Bo criticized. We were too busy with the move to our new home to dwell on her words. We just didn't have the time to listen. Watching us busy with the moving process, Rachel was muttering, "How presumptuous." Yet, we managed to settle into our new home. During a busy period, my in-laws were very happy with Rachel and her husband's return, celebrating without showing much interest in our relocation. Rachel seemed to sense that our quick departure meant we did not want any future issues with them. We chose not to disclose our new home's location to my in-laws or Rachel and her husband, effectively avoiding the possibility of them intruding. About a month after we left the family home, I received several calls from Rachel. Since I noticed the calls late, I hurried to answer and found a confused and agitated Rachel demanding, "What in the world is this? What's with the $2,700 monthly mortgage? And why are my parents saying they have no money?" Actually, Rachel was under the impression that we had been paying $1,000 monthly. However, we thought this misunderstanding was cleared when her husband checked the relevant documents during the mortgage transfer and signature process. We believed that no one would overlook important documents regarding their future home. But wasn't it clearly stated in the documents that the monthly mortgage payment for this house was set at $2,700? What? That must be a joke. Suddenly $2,700. Rachel panicked. I thought that you and your husband, being high-income elites, wouldn't need to worry about the amount, I said honestly, and Rachel, with a faint voice on the phone, started, well, actually, I'm not working right now, and my husband has just returned from overseas after causing some problems. Our income has decreased compared to before. I was frankly surprised that she, who had acted superior when driving us out of the family home, couldn't even afford the monthly repayments we had been making. Moreover, Rachel had more troubling news. Why are my parents saying that they are in financial trouble? Weren't they supporting you by bearing your living expenses? Oh, you thought so? Actually, we were covering the full mortgage, only hoping they could help a bit with living expenses. But we didn't receive much financial help from them. They spend their money at the casino almost every day. Casino. Yes, casino. It seems my in-laws weren't into gambling before we started living together. They became addicted in the past few years, and Rachel might not have been aware of this fact. With hardly any income, and now a monthly expense of $2,700. I was counting on my parents' money, and now there's none. Vanessa, please lend me some money, Rachel pleaded. However, I declined. Despite her looking down on us, she was asking for help from us, the ordinary people, when in trouble, indicating her desperation. But we have a growing son and need to save for the future, so we couldn't afford to support another household. I conveyed this fact and ended the call. Later, I heard Rachel and her in-laws tried to visit our new home without planning, only to end up at the wrong address and inadvertently involved the police. Rachel, who has found a new job, is keeping her in-laws away from the casino, pulling her part-time earnings for mortgage repayments. On weekends, the four of them create a very tense atmosphere at home. Whether they will eventually lose the house or manage to complete the mortgage payments remains uncertain, but we are focusing on enjoying our lives without worrying about their situation. Whatever the future holds, we, the three of us, are committed to not assisting Rachel, her husband, and my in-laws, enjoying our days to the fullest. My sister's remittances are just like a child's allowance, aren't they? Haha. If you can, try stopping the payments. Haha. I've been sending money to my family for 18 years since becoming a working adult. Yet, to be treated like this by my parents and sister, unforgivable. I've worked so hard for my family. I'll decisively cut ties with these people. My name is Wendy. I am 37 years old. For 18 years since graduating high school, I have been diligently working as a working adult. I have a younger sister named Jennifer, who is much younger than me. Jennifer graduated from university a few years ago and has been working for 4 years. Unlike me, Jennifer has been spoiled by our parents from the moment she was born. After Jennifer was born, our parents' affection completely shifted towards her. Even though they were warm to me before, they gradually became indifferent. Mom, there's a school event coming up. Even when I tell my mom about school events, she doesn't seem to look at me. Mom's busy taking care of Jennifer right now. But I was told to make sure to tell you and Dad by my teacher. Yeah, just leave the printout over there. Oh, and Mom, today's lunch was pasta. You're so persistent. It doesn't matter what you're talking about. Can't you see I'm busy with Jennifer? I'm sorry. Conversations with my stay-at-home mom decreased, but it was the same with my dad. He ignores me and heads straight to Jennifer when he comes home from work. Jennifer, I'm ho. Dad's back. Dad. Today at school. What, Wendy? School stuff is for your mom. Dad's tired from work, but Mom's busy with Jennifer. Dad's tired and wants to see Jennifer's face to get energized. Be quiet for a bit. Okay. It's true that Jennifer is cuter in both appearance and personality. I admit that. With her clear double eyelids, beautifully curled chestnut hair, adorable laugh, and friendly nature despite her youth, Jennifer has everything I don't. Yet, I still long for our parents' love. Even when I got into the top high school in the county, there wasn't even a congratulations from them. And then, in the fall of my senior year of high school, I tried to talk to my parents about my future during dinner. Mom, Dad, about college. At my words, my father frowned. Listen, Wendy, you're the eldest daughter, so from now on, live for Jennifer's sake. What? What do you mean, for Jennifer's sake? After you graduate from high school, don't go to college. Start working and help out with the household expenses. Help out. We live in a rental property. So, at least pay the rent. A rental property. But this is public housing, and it costs $1,000 a month. Are you saying I should pay $1,000 every month? If you become a full-time employee, that should be possible. Wait a minute. With my current grades, I could easily get into a national university, I've been told by my teacher. Then, my mother, who was next to him, interjected. National university? What's the use of someone ordinary like you going there? Not you too, Mom. There's something I want to study. So, no way. Jennifer is still young and will need a lot of money for her going forward. We can't afford to spend any more on you. But there are scholarships, and I'll make sure not to be a burden on the household finances. I'll work part-time and contribute money to the house. Please, you're really persistent. As your parents, we are saying it's not possible. Children don't have the right to defy that. That's so unfair. Despite my homeroom teacher pleading with my parents several times, they never changed their minds. In the end, I gave up on going to college, obtained some qualifications, and started working as a full-time employee at a local small to medium-sized enterprise. Though the company was small, my qualifications came in handy, and I was able to earn a decent salary even as a high school graduate. Since moving out in my third year of working and living alone, I've continued to send the designated rent to my parents, while being frugal with my own living expenses. Even so, I finally got married, albeit later than most. To inform my parents, I returned home for the first time in a while. In the front yard, my parents and sister were having a cheerful conversation. I'm home. Before I could greet them, I overheard a shocking conversation. We only consider Jennifer to be our daughter, right, Sarah? That's right. Jennifer graduated from college and even got a job at the same company as Dad. In comparison, Wendy. She only finished high school and got a job at some unknown company. Dad feels ashamed. Exactly. We took care of her until she graduated high school, and yet, she hasn't even said thank you. What an ungrateful child. Then Jennifer, unaware that I was listening, began to speak. Mom, Dad, don't be too harsh. It's pitiful for my sister, right? After all, she's working hard for us even with her lower education level. Haha. Well, indeed. You're right about that, Jennifer. Yes. Even if she's not that capable, she can earn money. Let's continue to take as much as we can from her. That's right. If Wendy pays the rent, we can save money, and we can spend that on other things, right? Jennifer will need various things now that she's working. Unlike Wendy, Jennifer is beautiful, so she needs money for her upkeep. That's right. I even got scouted by a model agency on the street the other day. That's my daughter. Wendy is a far cry from you. I wonder who she takes after. That's why. Even the little monthly change from a sister like that is better than nothing. Well, it's a bit embarrassing she only finished high school though. Haha. The moment I heard that conversation, something inside me snapped. Unbelievable. Do they have any idea how much I've worked for this family? Following instructions, working, and sending money home. I've even sent birthday presents every year since becoming an adult. And above all, I've been paying this house's rent in full. I thought someday they would praise me. Someday they would acknowledge me with faint hope. But all of that was just a dream. Instead, to be spoken of so terribly behind my back. Before I knew it, I had stepped into the yard. My parents and sister looked at me in surprise. Embarrassed about being a high school graduate? Do you understand why I couldn't go to college? With an awkward face, Jennifer asked, Sis, you were here? I directed my anger at her. I was told by Dad and Mom to work for your sake, you know? I really wanted to go to college. There was so much I wanted to study. I didn't know that. Jennifer retorted just as defiantly. Can you stop getting mad for no reason? No matter how much you yell at me, it won't change the fact that you have a low education level, so stop acting so high and mighty. Haha, how can you say such things? I heard the conversation earlier, you all just see me as a convenient source of money. Jennifer snorted with laughter. Took you long enough to notice? Sis, being a high school graduate is embarrassing for us, you know? The only useful thing you can do is earn money and send it home, so stop being so proud. Haha, will you stop it? As I moved to push Jennifer away, Dad stopped me. Then he coldly said to me, Hey, Wendy, what are you doing to your sister? Have you lost your mind? Not only are you low educated, but your character has fallen too? Wait, Dad, you're the crazy one. It's all because you and Mom have always prioritized Jennifer. That's natural, isn't it? Jennifer is the cutest. From the moment Jennifer was born, we lost interest in you. What? What's that supposed to mean? Aren't I just as much a daughter to you and Mom as Jennifer is? Shock and anger made tears well up in my eyes. Seeing this, my parents coldly said to me, "A daughter? We don't think of a high school graduate like you as our daughter. Don't come back to our home with such low education." Just like Dad said, don't get ahead of yourself just because you put in a little money. Oh, is that so? I glared back at my parents. If that's the case, I guess I don't need to send money anymore, right? Yeah, that's fine. You were never part of the family to begin with. Well then, let's cleanly cut ties here. Dad and Jennifer are working, and Jennifer is at the same company as Dad, after all. You won't need my help, will you? Haha. Then, my sister Jennifer too flashed a malicious smile. The money you send home is just like a kid's allowance, right? Haha. Try stopping the payments if you can. Haha. Oh, is that okay with you? I'll really stop sending money, you know? Dad and Mom said they want to cut ties, right? It's embarrassing to have a low-educated sister like you. If this means we can cut ties, then maybe it's actually lucky for us. Understood. Then, I'll gladly do just that. I'll never have anything to do with you at all again. I told everyone that and left my family home. And so, without even sharing the news of my marriage, I severed ties with my family. 6 months later, I received a call from my father. Reluctantly, I answered the phone, and my father said in a panicked tone, "Is that you, Wendy? It's me, your dad. I know. What do you want? Help me, please." Huh? What do you mean? I thought we had cut ties. Don't say that. I'm really in trouble right now. Could you please start sending at least the rent again? What are you talking about? Have you forgotten that you said my money was just like a kid's allowance? I was wrong back then. I apologize. Please, our family might fall apart at this rate. Hearing that, I couldn't help but snicker. Ah, that's right, Dad. You got fired from your job, so things must be tough, huh? What? Your company was acquired by another company, right? Plus, it turns out you were embezzling money, so getting fired was only natural. What? How did you know? Because the company that acquired yours belongs to my husband. What? Husband? Yes, my husband was the next CEO. His father's company had acquired the one where my father worked. During that process, my father's embezzlement came to light, and he was immediately fired. I was aware that my husband was going to be the next CEO, but I didn't know about the company's situation. Then my husband mentioned there was an employee who embezzled money at the acquired company, and coincidentally, he had the same last name as Winnie. Curious, I looked into it and found out that the employee was my own father. After stopping the remittances, I had been looking forward to my family facing difficulties. However, embezzlement was a pitiful act. There's no doubt they were struggling financially. The $1,000 rent I stopped paying must have been a significant blow to them. After I finished explaining, my father said in a trembling voice, "If you knew, why didn't you reach out to help? Why should I have to reach out? You're my daughter. Not just me, but your mom and Jennifer are struggling too. Don't you want to help your family?" No, not at all. I don't feel even a shred of desire to help you. What are you saying? It seemed my father had put the phone on speaker as my mother and sister began to blame me together. Come on, Wendy. Enough is enough. In a situation like this. That's right, Cess. From what you said, isn't your husband the son of a CEO? You must have quite a lot of money, right? I sighed deeply on the phone. So what if I have money? And that means I should help you? Of course. Your family is in trouble. Cess, you know, right? I'm working at the same company as Dad. Dad's embezzlement has spread throughout the company, and I'm isolated there. I don't care about that. Plus, we cut ties months ago. And now what? Being a family only when it's convenient for you, expecting help now. Isn't that too convenient? Are you stupid? Truth be told, I was furious, and now all three of them started yelling at me. Enough is enough. We'll retract the disownment. So, start sending money again right away. That's right. We raised you until you grew up, so you should properly show your gratitude. Sis, the family is in trouble. Do something as an older sister. Their selfish demands made me feel nauseous. Taking a deep breath, I lashed out at them. Hey, enough with this family nonsense. I've already cut ties with you, and I have no obligation to help you. To only act like a family when it suits you. No matter how much trouble you're in or how miserable the outcome, it has nothing to do with me. All three of you can go to hell, you scum. I hung up the phone and immediately blocked the contact details of my parents and sister. Since then, I haven't seen them. Now that I'm married and living in a new home with my husband, it's unlikely they'll be able to find me. Rumor has it that my father couldn't repay the embezzled money and ended up in legal trouble. My sister, known in the company as the embezzler's daughter, resigned in an awkward atmosphere. With both of their breadwinners gone, my mother is juggling part-time jobs while depleting their savings to get by. Naturally, they couldn't afford the house rent and apparently moved into a cramped one-room apartment. There's no prospect of repaying my father's embezzlement, and my mother's part-time income is barely covering living expenses. My sister hasn't found a new job and has been shut in her room indefinitely. The end for the family that drove me away turned out to be quite grim. Well, it's their own fault. Meanwhile, I've been working as a secretary after my husband took over as CEO. Though I'm still inexperienced and busy every day, my life is incomparably more fulfilling than before. From now on, I'll forget about such a family and live my life thinking only of my new family. Why do you, a complete stranger, insist on staying in our house for so long? My sister-in-law reprimanded me with an angry voice. After losing my beloved husband, I continued living with my in-laws. Was I not allowed to be there? I never thought you were this kind of woman. Leave as soon as possible. Even my usually kind mother-in-law began to criticize me harshly. If that's how it was, I'd leave on my own. These were the words I screamed in my heart, but I suppressed them. I understand, I said while vowing revenge. My name is Gina, and I am 40 years old. I work as an elementary school teacher. My husband, James, also an elementary school teacher at a different school, was 42 that year. We were married for 12 years. We met at the first elementary school I worked at after graduating from college. James, 2 years my senior, was a reliable senior colleague who taught me various things about school life. Through work, we were drawn to each other and eventually got married. I loved children and became a teacher to spend time with them. But sadly, we didn't have any children. My father-in-law passed away in his 50s before we got married, and James lived with his mother until I joined the family. Thanks to the real estate and other assets inherited from my father-in-law, my mother-in-law was financially secure. However, since the beginning of our marriage, we had decided to pay $2,000 monthly to my in-laws. We had a dream we wanted to realize. Despite needing to save for it, we regularly transferred money to my in-laws for utilities, food, and a small rent out of a sense of duty. We continued to work as teachers, increasingly worried about the growing number of children not attending school. Our dream was to establish a learning center where such children could study comfortably. James' older sister, Mary, who is 3 years older than him, is married and lives in another state. My sister-in-law has a son, but he left home last spring for studies, so it should be just the two of them now. Although living about an hour's drive away, my sister-in-law visited every weekend, asking my mother-in-law for financial help. My son's tuition is short. Can you help a little? My sister-in-law would softly ask, Really? It can't be helped. How much do you need? My mother-in-law would spoil my sister-in-law for some reason. James couldn't understand why. Frustrated, he finally asked his sister one day, Sis, you received a fair amount from Dad's inheritance, right? Why are you always short of money? He asked incredulously. My sister-in-law then retaliated. You don't have any kids, so you wouldn't understand. Raising children is incredibly expensive. You talk about inheritance, but that money can't last forever. However, my sister-in-law's spending was clearly excessive even in my eyes. Once she asked for money for education, another time for home repairs, and before that, for food. Every time, my mother-in-law would give my sister-in-law a considerable amount. I couldn't understand why. That day, we went to our respective schools as usual. An ordinary morning, the usual scenery. Until that phone call. I received news that James had collapsed and was rushed to the hospital. Urged to hurry there, I exclaimed in shock, What? My husband collapsed. Confused, but upon reaching the hospital, I found James unconscious and he had to undergo thorough examinations. I wished it was all a bad dream. But despite aggressive treatment, James passed away that night. Faced with this unexpected event, I didn't even have time to cry, immediately taking leave from work to arrange the funeral. I felt I couldn't mentally survive otherwise. My mother-in-law, likely more heartbroken than me, courteously received the mourners throughout the funeral. It was an opportunity to meet my sister-in-law's family again. My sister-in-law's husband, Robert, and their son, Alex, who was a college student, helped devotedly. However, my sister-in-law herself didn't seem to grieve over her own brother's death. It almost seemed like she was happy about it. After James' funeral, I returned to my mother-in-law's house. My sister-in-law's family said they had other things to do and went home without dropping by. Then, my mother-in-law spoke quietly. "Gina, I never thought being bereaved of my son would be this lonely." Hearing these words, my pent-up sadness burst out, and I broke down crying. "If it's okay with you, Gina, would you stay in this house forever? I'm lonely living by myself." My mother-in-law spoke kindly to me. "Let's support each other from now on, mother," I replied, wiping away my tears. However, more troubles followed. Just as we decided to live together, my mother-in-law suddenly collapsed. It might have been due to the grief of losing her son. She was diagnosed with a stroke. Fortunately, she survived but was left with paralysis in her right side. My mother-in-law, relying on a cane, wished to continue living in her house. "There are so many memories in this house. I want to spend my time here," she said that with a slightly slurred speech, but with determination. "I'm fine, so please continue to focus on your work, Gina," my mother-in-law kindly told me. However, I was worried about leaving my half-paralyzed mother-in-law alone at home. We decided to use long-term care insurance for home care with the help of a helper. Even after James passed away, I continued to contribute $2,000 monthly for my mother-in-law. However, my sister-in-law started visiting her mother more frequently. "I'm just worried about Mom," my sister-in-law said, "but could anyone understand this?" From past experiences, I felt I shouldn't easily believe my sister-in-law's words. My mother-in-law, having lost her mobility and feeling weak, asked, "Gina, Mary wants to live here with us. What do you think?" "Mary wants to. What about her husband?" I asked in surprise. "Alex is already in college and not at home. She says it's okay for her to live here alone. Her husband might move here eventually too," my mother-in-law explained. I felt uneasy and asked frankly, "If you think it's good, I won't oppose it, but what about me?" "What are you saying, Gina? You're like a daughter to me. It's totally fine for you to be here," my mother-in-law assured me. However, if my sister-in-law actually moved into the house, I wouldn't be able to stop her like James did. This left me with unresolved anxiety. Amid these concerns, I had to leave the house for a week-long training, leaving my mother-in-law's care to the helper. "Mother, I'll be away for a week from tomorrow, so please follow the helper's instructions," I said, trying to sound lighthearted to ease my mother-in-law's anxiety. "Don't give money to Mary if she comes, and if something seems odd, contact her husband, too." I was very worried about the possibility of my sister-in-law visiting the house during her absence. I couldn't concentrate on my training because of this worry. Upon returning home after a week, I was greeted by my sister-in-law. "Welcome back, Mom wants to talk to you." My sister-in-law looked at me with a smug smile. I had an ominous feeling. Entering the living room, my mother-in-law looked at me with a displeased expression. "I'm back," I greeted timidly, overwhelmed by the atmosphere. "Gina, were you trying to kick me out and put me in a facility?" My mother-in-law suddenly accused me with anger. Confused by the situation, my sister-in-law chimed in. "Hey, Gina, remember what you said before? You said, 'I want to put Mom in a facility. It's too much to handle her,' didn't you?" She continued as if I had said such a thing. "It's okay since you're a stranger anyway. I'll take care of Mom from now on so you don't need to be here anymore." My sister-in-law said this to me with a deliberately harsh face. My mother-in-law also showed her anger, screaming at me with a fierce look. "I can't believe it. You're a nuisance. Just leave quickly." "Understood, I will leave." With no strength to argue back, I held back my tears and started packing my belongings. Leaving behind the items filled with memories of James, I took only the essentials and left the house. "Thank you for everything," I said at the entrance, to which my sister-in-law, who was eager to drive me out, said, "You're still here? Leave quickly." A mix of sadness and frustration greatly disturbed my heart. I, being driven out of the house, returned to my parents' home without notice. What happened, Gina? What's with the luggage? My mother couldn't hide her surprise at my sudden return. Sorry for the suddenness, but right now, I don't want to talk about it. I'll go to work from here, so please leave me alone for a while. The room I used to occupy at my parents' house was now empty. I laid down the luggage, laid on the floor, and gazed at the ceiling, letting my thoughts wander. What did my sister-in-law plan to do with her own family? My mother-in-law had mentioned that Robert might eventually move in with her, but I never sensed such intentions from my sister-in-law. I wanted to think it was none of my business anymore, but I couldn't stay silent when I thought of my mother-in-law. Then I remembered something. The day before James collapsed, he tried to tell me something and was about to hand me an envelope, but he was called away by his mother, and I never got to hear about the envelope from him. What could be inside it? Could it be a will? I was worried. Hesitantly, I opened the envelope and checked its contents. It was. Seeing what was inside the envelope, I was astonished. The next day, I left for work from my parents' house, reported my training to the principal, returned to my duties, and ended the day as if nothing had happened. Excuse me, I'm leaving now. I said that as I prepared to leave, and a colleague said to me, "You must be tired from the training. It must have been tough losing your husband. Don't overdo it." However, the reason I was in a hurry to get home wasn't due to fatigue or the sorrow of James' death. I needed to contact Robert and ask about the situation with my sister-in-law. Considering it might turn into a serious conversation, I was hesitant to use my personal phone in a public place where anyone could overhear. On my way home, I sent an email to Robert expressing my desire to talk to him in person. "I have something to talk about regarding my wife, too," Robert replied immediately. When I got home, I locked myself in my room and called Robert. Robert seemed to have been waiting for my call and responded immediately. "Gina, I'm glad. I was just about to contact you," Robert started with a relieved voice. I told him about Mary staying at her mother's house and went on to explain that she was making false claims. I told him that I had been accused of trying to take over the house by sending my mother-in-law to a nursing home based on her lies, and as a result, I was driven out of the house. "Really? Where are you now?" Robert asked in surprise. I replied that I was at my parents' house then and detailed everything that had happened since the funeral. "I'm really sorry about that," he apologized sincerely. "No, Robert, you don't need to apologize," I responded. My sister-in-law had a history of leaving home without notice and spending money freely, which seemed to have intensified since her son Alex went to college. "Wait, Mary was receiving money from her mother? What happened to that money?" he asked. I knew my mother-in-law had been giving my sister-in-law a significant amount of money, but I thought Robert knew about it. "I haven't heard anything about that. I've been paying for Alex's tuition, and our family has always been in a tight financial situation." Robert replied, sounding surprised. "Actually, I have a request. Could you come to my parents' house next Sunday?" I proposed. I felt a bit presumptuous making such a request, but I decided to try it. Their house was about a 30-minute drive from my parents' house and was on the way to my mother-in-law's house. I had planned to meet Robert and then head to my mother-in-law's house together. "Understood. I know roughly where it is, so I'll rely on navigation. I'll contact you again when I'm close." Robert agreed to my suggestion and ended the call. Shortly after, I received a call from my mother-in-law's house. What could it be, just a day after the previous events? With that thought, I answered the phone. "Hey, you. You used money without permission, didn't you? Give it back immediately." My sister-in-law yelled at me. "What do you mean by using money without permission?" I asked, confused. I couldn't understand what my sister-in-law was talking about and felt completely misunderstood. When I checked Mom's bank account, the balance was too low. "What did you use it for?" My sister-in-law pressed, but I had certainly not done such a thing. It's true that I forgot to deposit the planned $2,000 to being preoccupied with my mother-in-law's illness and caregiving procedures, but I never withdrew money from the savings without permission. Is there some misunderstanding? I have made deposits into her account, but I've never looked inside the passbook. I firmly replied. My sister-in-law seemed unsatisfied with my answer and raised her voice. Come over on Sunday. Let's clarify this matter. This was convenient for me, so I replied, understood. Let's discuss it in front of her, and ended the call. On the planned Sunday, Robert arrived at my parents' house earlier than expected. Oh, you are? My mother said, surprised at Robert's sudden appearance. Yes, he's the husband of my late husband's sister. Mom, you've met him before, haven't you? I explained. My mother couldn't immediately recall who he was, but eventually remembered, yes, I've seen him before. Seeing my mother's realization and joy, I explained, actually, I wanted to consult him about my husband's family matters. After leading Robert to the living room and briefly exchanging greetings, I took out an envelope. I want you to see this. The envelope contains several photos and a report. As I spread the photos and the report in front of Robert, he exclaimed in surprise, "What? This is?" The photos showed my sister-in-law with a young man, enjoying herself at a nightclub and heading to a hotel. The report, from a detective agency, detailed evidences of my sister-in-law's expenses. James entrusted this to me before he passed away, and since he died before we could discuss it, I only recently looked at it. I explained the situation to Robert. James had suspected his sister of reckless spending and had secretly commissioned an investigation. He intended to discuss the results with me, but passed away before he could. Robert trembled with anger at the photos. I thought she was frequently leaving the house, but to think she was doing this. With a sigh full of indignation, Robert said, "Gina, can you come with me right now? This situation can't be ignored." I had intended to do so from the start and nodded immediately. 30 minutes later, we arrived at my mother-in-law's house and rang the doorbell. "It's Gina, I've come as promised," I said, and soon heard my sister-in-law's annoyed voice. "How long do you plan to make me wait?" The sound of unlocking the door came, and the door opened. "Come in." My sister-in-law greeted us, but upon seeing Robert, she tried to close the door. Robert quickly grabbed the doorknob. "Mary, we need to talk. Can you listen for a moment?" he said, holding the door. His voice was calm, but his anger was palpable. My sister-in-law struggled to close the door but couldn't overpower the man's strength and eventually had to leave it open. "Fine. What do you want?" She said that while allowing us to stay at the entrance, seemingly not wanting my mother-in-law to be aware of Robert's unexpected visit. "Is that you in these pictures? Who's the man next to you?" Robert asked, confronting his wife with the photos. "Where did you get these?" "No way." Mary was shocked upon seeing the photos. "Do you remember?" "Well, who is this?" "Answer me." Robert, usually mild-mannered, pressed his wife. "Just a friend. Can't I have young friends?" My sister-in-law retorted defiantly. "A friend? Don't lie, I know everything." Robert yelled at her. "Why? Who told you?" Realizing my sister-in-law could no longer continue her lies, she looked defeated. "Your late brother James was concerned about your spending and had it investigated." Robert calmly revealed the truth. "You demanded money from your mother and squandered it all on a nightclub." "I'm aware of the entire situation," Robert continued, trying to contain his anger. "It's hard enough to pay for Alex's tuition, and you exhaust our living expenses and still dare to ask for more money? What a comfortable life, huh?" He continued, his voice filled with rage. His anger did not subside. "That's enough. I don't care if you leave us. We're getting a divorce," he coldly declared to her. "Eh? What?" My sister-in-law muttered in shock. "Didn't you hear me? We're getting a divorce. I'll send the divorce papers later, fill them out, and send them back," Robert stated bluntly. At those words, my sister-in-law collapsed onto a seat. Later, my sister-in-law and Robert proceeded with the divorce through a lawyer and ultimately finalized it. They agreed to consider her spending at the nightclubs as a reason for compensation and to share the payment of Alex's tuition until his university graduation. However, there was a possibility that she might default on the payments. so they agreed that a lawyer would collect the payments monthly. After receiving her share of my father-in-law's inheritance, my sister-in-law had squandered it all on her expenses at the nightclub and then set her sights on my mother-in-law's property. But she found the bank account balance to be lower than expected, and her plan failed. In fact, it seemed that the money James and I had been giving my mother-in-law was used for living expenses and given to my sister-in-law as she demanded, leaving almost no savings behind. My in-laws' house belonged to my mother-in-law, and there was probably no more money left to give to my sister-in-law unless the house was sold. I learned from the caregiver that my sister-in-law, realizing her failure, had abandoned my mother-in-law and left. Meanwhile, my mother-in-law continued to live a modest life alone, with the help of the caregiver.